Kurdistan and the front line in the international battle against the Islamic State group. As in Syria, Kurdish Peshmerga forces are at the forefront of the fight. Thousands of civilians have been forced to flee their homes after the jihadists overran several cities. Aided by international coalition airstrikes, Kurdish forces have managed to retake lost ground and set up checkpoints across more than 1,000 kilometres along the border. But while some displaced people have started to return, still more have chosen to leave what has become a battleground. Edith, Bouvier and Guillaume Bression send us this report from the Kurdish border.
The city of Kirkuk and its huge oil fields have long been a flashpoint between the Iraqi State and Iraqi Kurdistan's regional government. But now it's the Islamic State organization which wants to control the area. After taking Mosul last June, the jihadists quickly moved further east to Kirkuk. 3,000 Kurdish soldiers were needed to retain control of the city.
We can go over there, but no further. You can only stay for 5 minutes, no longer. The Islamic State organization's really close and we're within their reach. Here's our outermost checkpoint. You see that bridge just in front of us? That's where the jihadists are. They're hiding under the bridge.
Kurdish forces have taken the place of the Iraqi military, which were supposed to control this zone. The enemy isn't far away. There are regular skirmishes. Captain Farman is responsible for keeping the Kirkuk base safe.
We have to defend the front line. We patrol it day and night to make sure it's secure. We now have to guard over 1,000 kilometres of border, with the Islamic State organization positioned right in front of us.
This man has just been apprehended for filming Kurdish soldiers with his cell phone. He will be searched and taken away for questioning. Every week, Kurdish soldiers detain several suspected enemy spies and potential terrorists.
صحيح ليش صور؟ والله إن قلت حتى واحد البيت أقول لهم شوفوا هاي ماكو بكل شيء. بيبغوا جورا داينا تاخذهم ده. تفتيش يبقى بيجي بسيط جورا. قصي لقال ما كان بيبغوا جورا كداينا تاخذهم ده.
This road is the only one still open to civilians wishing to enter Kirkuk and Iraqi Kurdistan. The stream of people shows no sign of slowing. Their families fleeing war, their belongings piled on carts.
We lived under the jihadist authority, but we had to flee the airstrikes. Our children were terrorized, but the Islamic State organization doesn't let people leave easily.
A few kilometers away, in the suburbs of southern Kirkuk, the situation for displaced Iraqi refugees isn't much better.
It was at home with my husband and children when bombs began to fall very close by. We heard the explosions. It was an airstrike, and the armed militias opened fire in response.
It was very difficult for us to get to Kirkuk, and now we need everything: food, housing, psychological help. We arrived here with only our skin and our bones.
Several hundred families live together in poor conditions in these half-completed buildings. There is no privacy and no sanitation. The children cannot go to school. These displaced Sunnis feel forgotten by the world. The Kurdish government views them with suspicion, seeing them as potential followers of the Islamic State organization. Further west, the region of Zumar near Mosul is on the road to some semblance of stability, at least according to the Kurdish military. Here, about 90% of the population has returned, but they lack essentials such as water and electricity. These boxes of food aid will keep them going, but only for a few weeks. No one knows if this relative peace is here to stay in Zumar. Until recently, this area was the front line in the war, and the fighting is still uncomfortably close. Today, Yusuf and his family finally receive aid parcels. Until now, they had simply survived on their own wits. They lost everything when they fled their home. They're back, but have no idea if they will be able to stay.
When we fled, the Islamic State organization stole everything from us. Our electric generator, our fridge, our livestock. The Peshmerga are here now, so we're no longer afraid. But if they leave, we will have to leave once more.
With winter just around the corner, living conditions are worsening by the day.
People who are the most vulnerable, people in areas like this that were trapped by fighting and couldn't get help and are now receiving help. They're hard to get to areas, but they're not impossible to get to areas.
We're now heading closer to the front line. Here the enemy is only a kilometer away. Major Tassim Hassan takes us on patrol with his men.
Now we're going to a position where we can observe our enemies.
Trenches have been dug so that soldiers can observe the jihadists from close quarters along the 3-kilometer stretch controlled by this battalion. Here, in recent days, fighting has been sporadic.
We're just in front of the enemy position. They're there in the village in front of us. This is a very strategic position for us.
Last August, after the Islamic State organization took Mosul, French President François Hollande sent in heavy weapons to support the Kurdish fighters. Major Hassan's battalion received weapons, as did other units. They've nicknamed this machine gun the French Doshka. It's far more powerful than the Russian model the Kurdish forces were using before.
Before receiving these weapons, we were trained by French soldiers. Our enemies have better equipment. When they took Mosul, they captured all the equipment the Iraqi army had left behind.
A little further on, in Sunni territory, some tribes lived alongside the jihadists for several months after the Islamic State organization took over their city without the use of force. But people had to leave when the Peshmerga attacked the city to remove the jihadists. Today, as these families take refuge in an area that's now under Kurdish control, they have mixed feelings towards the Peshmerga.
Before, everything was normal. We went to work, we lived normally. We never saw armed men in the city. But when the Peshmerga attacked, our city collapsed. Before the Kurds came, there was no fighting.
The Kurds in Iraq want to show the world that they are the key in the fight against the Islamic State organization in Iraq and in the Syrian city of Kobani. They believe the Iraqi government is practically absent from this war. Instead, it is left to the Peshmerga to defend what they refer to as their border.
Well, for more on this, we're joined now by our guest, Middle East specialist Myriam Benrad. Hello, thank you very much for being with us on France 24. As we just heard at the end of that report, the Iraqi army is absent in this area. Is that true?
Well, the presence is very limited. There is an effort by the Iraqi army to retake some territories in conjunction with the Kurds and a number of Sunni tribes as well in a number of provinces, mainly Salah ad-Din, which is in the north of Iraq. But in the Kurdish territory and in disputed areas, this army is still mainly absent.
And can we talk of a cooperation between the army and the Kurds, considering they have this common enemy?
Well, there is an effort at cooperation. There was a move by the new Prime Minister, Haidar al-Abadi, to reshuffle the Iraqi army by replacing a number of commanders. There is an attempt at a more constructive dialogue between the central government and the Kurds, with, of course, the mediation of the Americans. But for the moment, this cooperation remains very limited. As I said, it's been restrained to a number of territories where basically this cooperation was fruitful. The Iraqi army with the Kurds, a number of tribes and also a number of militias managed to retake some territories. But the problem is the existence of old disputes that tend to come back to the forefront and sort of poison the political process and these attempts at creating a much more proactive strategy between the different forces on the ground.
Because the Peshmergas are the ones on the front line. Surely they believe that if they gain ground militarily, they might also gain ground politically. Is that the case?
Yes, of course it's the case, and it's the case also for other actors which are advancing their cards through this battle. It's been the case, for instance, also for a number of Sunni tribes that are ready to combat the Islamic State, but not at the expense of their own interests, including more political prerogatives and more autonomy. And in the case of the Kurds, they clearly translate their military superiority into more political claims on autonomy, if not independence, which posits a number of problems, including for the Americans who are trying to maintain Iraq within its existing borders, and the same thing for Syria.
And what would be a possible model for Iraq in that case?
Well, I think the model where that the American coalition tried to establish as of 2003 was a federal Iraq with devolution, so the maintenance of central government and with more autonomous provinces, regions. And I think we're still staying in this model. There's very little likelihood that we are going to go back to a centralized nation state, which is no longer the hope of most Iraqi actors themselves, including the Sunnis. And the question is, to what extent will Iraqi regions be autonomous, and to what extent will they maintain, what kind of relationship will they maintain with the central government? And this is, of course, this also has to do with the oil issue, the oil rent, and how its revenues will be allocated among the different levels of power. And this is a process that has been ongoing for a while, which was never really settled after the adoption of the Iraqi constitution in 2005. And the Islamic State has somehow resurrected this debate, which the Iraqis will have to settle at some point.
Now, as we heard in that report, some civilians appear to have welcomed the jihadists and actually fled once the Peshmergas came in to get rid of the jihadists. How much has the Islamic State surge underscored these sectarian tensions?
Well, the Sunnis were repressed. They were sidelined in 2003 from the political process. A Sunni alienation became a salient feature and chronic feature of the Iraqi transition as a whole. And against the repression of the central government under former Prime Minister Nouri al-Maliki, the Sunnis somehow chose to side with the jihadists and to embrace the Islamic State as the only alternative to a central government dominated by a Shi'i coalition and to the Kurdish autonomy at their borders. So the Sunnis now are very ambiguous, as was rightly said in your documentary. They've been exposed to the terror of the Islamic State, so some of them have now chosen to go back to the side of the government and to fight the Islamic State, and others are very ambiguous because they're not really seeing signs of improvement or more integration into the political process coming from Baghdad. So, but this is a very important question to finish, because I think that the position of the Sunnis will have a lot of influence over the next weeks and the battle against the group.
Myriam Benrad, thank you very much for having talked to us. That's where we're leaving this hour live from Paris. Stay with us on France 24.